All right, awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. I'm excited to be moderating this panel on Party of One, how to navigate being a solo founder. So for those of you who are wondering whether you can handle being a solo founder or just want some guidance on managing it alone, or wondering if maybe you'd be better off as a solo founder, if you are here, then you are in the right place. We will try to make sure that we expose you to various solo founder experiences from our panelists, and that we try to educate you on the importance of understanding the pros and cons of being a solo founder. I am John Harthorne. I'm your moderator for the morning. I am currently the founder and managing director of Two Lanterns Venture Partners. We launched in 2020. In February of 2020, we've made 22 investments. It's a software-only investment firm, seed stage mostly, with some pre-seed and Series A. I'm in Boston. I have a partner in New York who is Israeli. We do investments in the US and in Israel. Prior to launching the fund, I was the founder and longtime CEO of Mass Challenge, the startup accelerator, which I ran for about 10 years. And that's kind of where I built up my startup chops and got to know a lot of founders and a lot of corporates and a lot of investors. And I've seen thousands of startups pass through, many of them with solo founders. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of perspective as the investor and also as a founder myself. I founded Mass Challenge, I founded the fund. Initially, the ideas came to me as a solo founder, and then I went and found founders. So for me, that was an important element, but isn't for everyone. So with that, with my quick background, I want to have each of the panelists give a quick background of themselves, try to keep it under a minute, just a little bit about yourselves individually, what you do, and then a quick highlight of, are you a solo founder now? Have you been before? Are you thinking about being a solo founder? Just kind of a very quick highlight of that. And why don't we start sort of left to right from my perspective? It looks like Mo is on the far left. I can't, or you guys maybe are mirrored in my video, but I'm going to go with what I see. So Mo, why don't you kick it off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll pass it along to your left, it looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, John. My name is Manisha Misra. I am the founder of Boards by Mo. We are a catering company here in the Boston area. So about 2.5 years ago, I was working my 9 to 5. And of course, we all know what was happening 2 years ago. We were all getting sent home from work and had a lot more free time. So I started a little weekend side hustle of delivering charcuterie boards and cheese boards and snack boxes throughout the Boston area. It was a lot of fun. I did not expect it to go anywhere. And then now we're a full service catering company. We do a lot of special events, weddings, company conferences. We do workshops, and really just anything that involves cheese, which is a really fun job to have. And throughout that process, I realized that there really weren't a ton of resources for people that are trying to start up food and beverage businesses in the creative field. So I actually created some business courses, and I'm also now a small business mentor to people who are trying to start the same thing. Somehow this has landed me on the Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40, which I was very grateful for. And I'm also a Harvard Business School managed mentor for other entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Good stuff. Melissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Hi, my name is Melissa Doral. I'm currently a solo founder. The name of my company is ecos.ai. It's an all-in-one events, networking, and conversations platform. The reason that we initially started talking and thinking about the idea was pre-COVID, of how people were engaging when they started a job, when they attended an event. Instead of just seeing a list of people, who are they supposed to network with, but how do you not leave that specific experience and feel like you're getting both? You're able to listen to people as well as network with people, or you're starting a new job and you don't have to wait for your manager to make intros for you. We started 2 years ago. We are now available as a web app and on iOS, and hopefully we'll have some of you guys using us after this.
Excellent. Rushi?
Yep. Thanks for having me. My name is Rushi Gammuki, founder and CEO of Bola AI, solo founder, as you can imagine. I've been a solo founder now for 4 years, since 2018, when I started this thing. And basically, what we do is we do voice AI assistance for medical procedures. So think of an Alexa for a doctor to help them record patient examinations. And I live in Boston with my wife, and I've been here almost my whole life. So excited to talk about being a solo founder today. Thanks.
Awesome. Good stuff. Sounds like we've got a lot of good fodder from across the panelists. Let's take a very quick poll of the audience, just so we have a little bit better understanding of who is listening in both in person and online. And I think the MC is going to help me to launch that poll. Is that correct? Is somebody going to kick that off for me? And that's just a poll of kind of, are you trying to understand who's out there? Solo founders, co-founders, team members, and other. So hopefully they will kick that off. And in the meantime, we can jump into the next question. So just to kind of kick it off, I'm going to keep going in the same order that we initiated originally. So Mo, you're always going to be in the hot seat first to go, but you get the advantage of having an open field to describe your experience. So maybe just, your quick thoughts on advantages and disadvantages of being a solo founder. So obviously, it presents some challenges, also some advantages. What do you see as kind of the primary advantages and disadvantages that you've experienced so far that might be helping other people to think through this scenario?
So I feel like anytime I start talking about a positive, I talk my way into that same positive being a negative when it comes to this. So for example, I love the speed and efficiency of being a solo founder. If I have an idea or I say, oh my gosh, we're going down this path, that's it. I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't have to consult with anyone. I can just start going if that's the way I want to go. But then sometimes I'll pause halfway and be like, what if there was a better direction, or if I had someone to bounce ideas off of, or someone who could give me a fresh perspective and make me feel a little bit differently? So as much as I love the speed of being able to make those decisions, I do find myself oftentimes wondering, like, am I really always right? This doesn't feel like it can be going so well all the time. So sometimes I do think that it would be nice to have that other person. And then I think the other part is, I really enjoy kind of being in control of the situation. And, that also comes with, understanding that I have to accept those challenges. So I think it's helped me grow a lot being a solo founder as well. It's helped me learn a lot about myself and where my weaknesses and where my strengths are, things I did not know for most of my life that all of a sudden I've just been forced into the situation and I've had to figure out about myself.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing is obviously decision speed and control as being like strengths there, but on the downside, lacking other perspectives and maybe being lacking a little bit of that collaboration and maybe being a little bit lonely or sort of left wondering whether you sort of have the full perspective.
Yeah. And I worked in sales for a decade prior to this. So I've always been in this like pit scenario where I'm working with 20, 30, 50 other sales reps. We've always had so much collaboration, been able to talk through decisions before we make them, strategy processes. So it does feel different not having that now and being the only one kind of creating this path forward.
Yeah. All right, Melissa, let's hear a little bit from you. I think when we spoke earlier, you shared some similar thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to second Mo on the control thing 100%. You can make faster decisions. It's definitely a lonely seat. You don't really have anyone that you can point to when you say, well, we made this decision together and that's why it failed. But I think one of the things that I learned in the past 2 years is if you surround yourself with good advisors and teammates, they become a part of you as a founder, as a foundation of your company. So you can definitely use them as a sounding board, but it's definitely a lonely seat. I think that I like the speed of how you can get from, deciding something or thinking about an idea and then making a decision pretty quickly. But the aftermath of, okay, and this is what happened as a result feels like a very lonely seat, I think. And one of the other things is, I think, and we'll talk a little bit about some of these other topics, but fundraising as a solo founder is a very, very lonely place to be. I think that you feel like you are responsible not only for your company, you're responsible for your investors, you're responsible for your team and their well-being. So that's one other thing that I'd like to that. I think that's one of the things that really had me struggling in the beginning, but also made me feel like I had control over it, just because I was the only one kind of going out there and having to take the brunt of it.
Yep. Very, very key point. And as an investor, I can second that it increases at least the perception of team risk, right? When you have one primary founder who might get sick or might decide that they're no longer as passionate or excited about it, it introduces risk for the investor. And so that, raises the bar when pitching others, which is obviously an additional challenge. Rushi, what else do you see?
I mean, I think we've covered a lot of it, but yeah, the speed of decision making is incredible. I think not having someone to bounce your ideas off of, that's the scary part. A lot of the conversations you'll have are internal, right? You'll replay, what did you do? Why did you think about it that way? What was successful? What was failure? When with a co-founder, you would actually be having those conversations externally, which doesn't seem like there's a big difference, but there's a huge difference. Yeah. And so surrounding yourself with advisors, early employees, people who trust you, who you respect their decision, that's huge. And yeah, the second part, I think the loneliness, right? No one is as invested in your company as you are as a solo founder. And this is pre-investment, pre-anything. And that's a really lonely place to be. But over time, I think and I think we're talking about this later, there's ways to manage that and ways to really succeed as a solo founder.
Yeah, awesome. No, I appreciate you guys already started to hit on the strategies, which is great. And I think a key advisory board is a very key step, and having other, strong employees surrounding you is great. So what about, it didn't come up explicitly here in that initial foray, but, another commonly cited downside is just burnout, right? And maybe this is sort of the extension of loneliness to a certain extent, but you're on the hook for everything, right? And the sort of always, as a founder CEO, the buck stops with you, even if you have co-founders. But nevertheless, when you're the sole co-founder, it really stops with you. That you can't, as you noted, sort of point to somebody else and say, well, that was your decision, or that was, it's sort of. So how do you guys handle that burnout? Even being a co-founder is already, typically an 80+ hour work week. You never really can turn it off. It's brutal and exhausting, and when you're alone, even more so. So I'm going to flip it so that Rushi doesn't always just have to say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll flip it this time. I'll keep going back and forth. And Melissa, I'll let you kick it off sometimes as well.
I was going to say I sat so strategically.
Nobody's off the hook here. You're all, as solo founders, you guys are used to taking lead positions. So I'm going to force you to each. So Rushi, why don't you kick this one off? And how do you handle burnout? Is it an issue for you? Maybe it's not. But if it is, how do you address it? If it isn't, how do you avoid it?
Yeah, with burnout, whether you have a co-founder or not, it's definitely a tough question. And really, you've got to be disciplined. You've got to really decide what are the most important things to you between both your life and work, and kind of really be disciplined on that. So I have a kind of framework, and it's basically tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I'm not going to tell you guys what my tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 are. But to make it to tier 1, you say, would I move a meeting for XYZ? And if that XYZ is a yes, and it can be sometimes yes, always yes, but if it's a yes, then it's tier 1. And you really need to set up what is important to you in your life. What are you going to miss work for? What are you not going to miss work for? And that's really the only way to do it. And yeah, in terms of burnout and always being on, I think that's the crucial thing. Being at work and doing work, it's great. And even if you're at 100, however many hours, it's a lot. But coming home, your Slack being on, your customers calling you, your emails coming in at 3 a.m. That's the part that really, for me at least, causes the burnout, keeps your brain on. So also finding ways to manage that, saying, okay, on Friday nights to Saturday morning, really none of my customers are going to call me, and they really shouldn't be calling me. So let's turn off Slack. Let's not check my email. And it's a slow process, right? Because you have to trust in it. Maybe one day you shut it off for 3 hours. Then you realize, okay, that wasn't so bad. You shut it off for 6 hours. You shut it off for 9 hours, 12 hours. But it's really being that disciplined. And if you don't, everything else will go away. It will just be work. So you've really got to keep a close tab on it.
Yeah, Great input. I think, again, also for non-solo founders, very valid points as well. Melissa, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that learning how to say no early on is extremely important to yourself, really. Because I think as solo founders, one thing that you try to do is everything. And in the beginning, you're wearing many, many hats. I mean, and I'm not going to lie here, you're always going to wear many hats. But let's just say in the beginning, you're wearing probably like 25, and maybe it'll drop to 10 or 5. But I think one of the things I realized early on is that for me at least, I started to lose myself on the things that made me or kept me healthy mentally, physically. And I'll give examples: working out, taking your dog for a normal, long walk rather than oh my God, come on, P, let's go in. We have a meeting. And frankly, if you've ever been on, virtual in a virtual meeting with me, you've probably seen my Weimaraner sit right here next to me. He's developed that since COVID. But I think it's important to be able to understand that you have needs. The company has needs, you have needs. And if you are not taking care of yourself, you cannot make the best decisions for your company. You cannot be the leader that you want to be. You cannot help your teammates get to the places that they want to get to. And making sure that you are giving yourself separate from the company, which obviously we see as one, is extremely important. And I think it'll help, whether you're a solo founder or a co-founder, it'll definitely help you keep your sanity.
Yep. Excellent. Good stuff. Mo, you want to add anything or second or
Yeah.
third anything?
Absolutely. So I was in an interesting situation when I started my company, and that I was still working my 9 to 5. So my schedule for 2 full years was essentially waking up at 5 a.m., going to the commercial kitchen, cranking out orders for the day, heading to HubSpot where I worked in sales, and I'd work from 9 to 5 in a quota carrying monthly role. So that was a grind. I'd get off work at 5. I would run back to the commercial kitchen to prep for the evening's orders or whatever it was. I'd finally stumble into my house at some point in the late evening, usually in tears, so tired, exhausted, no time for myself or my husband or really anything. And I think it got to a point with me where I just stopped liking what I did. It was no longer fun anymore. And for me, I started this as a creative passion, right? I've been doing this for friends and family for 10, 20 years, just out of the love of entertaining and hosting. And it got to a point where I really had to sit down and ask myself, is this grind, is this working the way that I'm working and burning myself out to this extent? Is it even worth it? Because I don't even like what I'm doing anymore. It's not fun. So I had to make a lot of really big decisions. I had to get really good at saying no, which is so difficult. I ended up quitting my 9 to 5, which was a really tough decision because I loved that job too. And so I think it got to a point where I knew if I kept going at that rate, then just it wouldn't be fun anymore. None of it would have been worth it. So I think it's important to figure out, where that line is of the worth of the business and your own mental health.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, I'll quickly summarize some of these great points. I think this is really, you guys are spot on. And I would say just on this last point, Mo, one of my best advisors, an Israeli super angel whom I adore and admire really deeply. I went when I was relatively early on with Mass Challenge. Now I did have co-founders when I launched, but one of them left very early. Another one left after a few years. And so I did find myself throughout that as a solo founder a lot of the time. And it's exhausting and it's tiring. All of the stuff that you guys said, discipline, prioritization, being able to turn stuff off from time to time, learning to say no, taking breaks and making sure you recuperate and sleep properly and sort of, walk the dog or just sort of clear your head a little bit. And then I think to this last point, Mo, kind of making sure that you're having fun. So, and I went to this Israeli super angel and I was giving him an update on Mass Challenge and I was almost frenetically rattling off all the good stuff, just trying to sort of pitch everything in the best possible light. We did this, we closed this new sponsor, we got this new advisor, I hired a new team member, all this good stuff is going on. And he was just like, stop, John, stop. Are you having fun? And I was like, yeah, I'm having a blast. He goes, then you're winning. That's it. That's all you have to say. You're having fun, then you're winning. If you're if you're like terrified and crying and everything is going, then you're not doing well, right? So and I think and you can control that to a certain extent, right? Some of that is exogenous variables that influence you. Like if it's like business is tough, and there will be times when you are crying and it is not going well. That's always the nature of being a founder at an early stage company. It's volatile. You'll go through those swings even in the course of a single day. But overall, you do need to look at yourself and say, am I having fun? Is this good for me and my life and the people around me? Because if it isn't, then probably you're doing something wrong. Probably you're not being as disciplined and prioritizing correctly, and probably you're not making the right decisions. You don't have the right team surrounding you, et cetera. So one other point that I didn't really hear, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more on, you guys mentioned advisors, which I think is great. Obviously, also building a strong team around you helps. Like even if they're not co-founders, but having people that you can rely on, and then learning to delegate. That was something that I struggled with from early on, especially in the early stage. You don't have a lot of money to hire, really talented, experienced people. So you're going to have to hire people that are enthusiastic, exciting. They might be amazing, but they might not be that skilled yet or that experienced. And so it's difficult at times to delegate important tasks to people that you're not sure you can fully trust yet, given their experience levels. How do you guys handle that? How do you make sure you've got a strong team around you, that they're motivated, even if they're not a co-founder, that they buy into the vision, et cetera? So I'd be curious to hear that. And maybe, Melissa, we can start with you this time.
I knew it. So I'm actually quite passionate about building teams. My previous role and roles leading up to that has been business development, operations, and previous to that, recruiting. I think that as founders, we might forget, because we're so concentrated on pitching to VCs, we forget that we actually have to pitch to our team. We have to bring passionate people who believe in what we're doing and the problem we're solving. And I think that's step one. Step one is selling your idea to person A, person B, person C, who is basically buying into it and saying, you know what, I'm going to quit my job for this. I'm going to potentially take a pay cut for this. I'm going to roll the dice on you and this idea because I believe as much as you do that this is definitely going to move someone, solve something. Finding people as advisors as well as teammates early on who not only support your idea, support your company, but also can act as a potential co-founder, I would say, or a strong founding team is very important to a startup success. Those are the people that you are going to when you ask questions or when you question yourself, when you question your own decisions. Those are the sounding boards that you have in your first year, first 2 years, first 3 years. And if you're doing well, and if you're actually building a really strong team, potentially for the rest of the startup's life cycle. And one of those people are actually in this room right now holding a camera towards me, having people who can help you and assist you in making the right decisions and feel like the company is taken as personally as they're taking the company as personal as you are, I think is extremely important for the success of your startup. And building that team requires time and effort. You really have to go out and find the right people.
Yep. Mo, you want to add any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think my personality is I like to be in control of everything. I've said that already, which makes it really hard to delegate. So I have 4 employees. I love them so much. They're so incredible. But for the first year, I kept them at arms. I wasn't fully letting them in because I was scared that they weren't going to care about the business as much as I did. They wouldn't respond in the way that I would, or they wouldn't be as committed to the experience as I am. So I wasn't fully letting them in at the beginning. And that was almost more detrimental than anything else that I could have done with my team. Then I realized when I had to take a step back and reevaluate my situation was that those 4 girls that work for me, they have strengths that I don't. And it's more important that I let those strengths shine within the company so they can help grow and they can be as invested and they feel like they own a little bit of that. I have one girl, Hannah, who manages all virtual company like experiences. So workshops, everything that people are doing for team building. She is so passionate about that. I'm so bad at it. Like if you put me on a Zoom and you're like, teach someone how to make something, I'm like, oh God, this is not very fun for me. She loves it though. So once I empowered her saying, hey, you own this part of it. This is all you, whatever you do with it. Like I'm on board, you make the decisions, let me know. And as long as there's nothing glaring and, super problematic, I'm good with it. And now I feel like because I let her in, she definitely feels the same way that I do. And I think it took me a long time to get there. But the delegation part is tough. I still struggle with parts of it, but it's really nice being able to let go of little pieces here and there to give yourself some more time for everything else that you enjoy.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I have always had very similar struggles with the delegation aspect, and I did it very well in certain circumstances and very poorly in others. And I think overall was always a struggle for me as well. Pretty critical skill to practice and learn, though, especially as a solo founder. Rushi, you want to add anything that we didn't cover there?
I think we covered a lot, but agreed. I think as a founder, especially a solo founder, you're always selling your vision, whether it's advisors, investors, employees. And if you have employees buy into the vision, really buy into the company, they're going to care about it a lot, and they're going to perform really well and do great things for you. One way to actually tell that is if they disagree with you on something. It's a pretty clear way that they think they should be doing something in a different way, but it shows that they care. They're not just doing what you told them. They're disagreeing with you because they also care about the company and they think there's a better way to do it. So it's coming from a place of good. And yeah, delegation, I'm glad we have this little circle here because yes, delegation is super hard and it's not something you get good at and then you're done with. You have to constantly do it. Maybe you delegated a few tasks day one, but then 2 months down the line, you realize you should be giving more and more. So it's something that constantly has to be in the back of your mind to get employees moving. Yeah.
All awesome points. One of the elements in terms of the hiring of all the right people and getting them around you that I found to be very helpful, in particular, and it was a little bit easier maybe at Mass Challenge, is to be very mission driven, right? The more that you can articulate your values and your vision, the easier it is to identify people that would happily do the job for free because they love the mission. And it was always my sort of ideal to hire people that would be willing to do the job for free, but then pay them, right? And then take care of them and give them good benefits to keep them. But that's how you can attract great people that will really pour their heart and soul in. And then I would often apprentice them. So say, hey, will you draft this email and then send it to me? We'll review it. And then you can send it ultimately once we're all on board. Or will you, I'm going to deliver the slide deck to this client. You're going to deliver this one slide and I'll be there and I'll watch you and then I can critique it later. We can talk about it. It may not be the most important slide, but then the next meeting, you're going to do 2 slides and then you're going to do half the deck and then you're going to do the whole deck. And I'm just going to watch and listen and chime in. And then eventually you can sort of release them and gain the confidence, but very difficult. I think you guys highlighted, right? So to find people with the same passion, identify what their strengths are relative to yours, and then allow this disagreement and discussion, which I think is really tough for people that, want to be in control. And especially, it's a fragile scenario to launch something that you love and believe in, and to let other people critique it who are relatively new can be difficult at times. That was a part that I struggled with a lot, where I always wanted to defend, my perspective on it and wasn't necessarily always as open to that critical input as I should have been. I think, Rishi, you're right. That's a sign that they care, not a sign that they don't care. And that's a really hard thing sometimes for founders to get over. But great points. So just a quick note that the poll actually went into the Q&A, and I'm seeing some of the results there. If you haven't chimed in, feel free to go in there. It looks like we're roughly split between most sort of solo founders and other. So is kind of the audience here, but fair number of solo founders, which is great. I think they'll get a lot of value out of this as well. So on to the next question is, I think with this, so have you guys considered getting a co-founder? And sort of, has that been a goal? And what signs, or what if you haven't considered it, what signs would lead you to consider it? Like what sort of symptoms would have to emerge in the company for you to be like, oh crap, I really desperately need to get a co-founder? And if you have considered it, have you tried? What methodologies might you use, or how would you find a co-founder? And if you've tried, what has worked, not worked, et cetera? Just kind of thinking through, like, have you considered getting a co-founder, and how has that process worked for you? How have you kind of implemented it? And let's go back to the original order. We'll start with Mo and work our way right on my screen. I think it's to your left-hand side on your guys' side.
So I have not considered getting a co-founder up until this point. It's just something that has not come up for me yet to where I feel like this is something I need at this time. We do have a lot of growth plans. There's some plans that I want to franchise. There's some things that I want to do. And at that point, I do think it would be important for me to get a co-founder. I'm just not there yet. I haven't done a ton of research into what that takes. I think I'm always going to be a little bit fearful that, I started this. This is my baby. Like, am I going to bring someone and all of a sudden they're going to care about this as much as I am? I don't know. I hope so, but it's just not really something that I have considered. And I do think if I do go that route, it's not really going to be anytime soon, to be honest.
Yep.
I think
Melissa.
to Mo's point or previous point, like if you feel like you are comfortable being in control, if you feel like you are comfortable making decisions and taking the brunt of that decision solely by yourself, if you are comfortable, as you mentioned, being in your head alone, then I would 100% say continue being a solo founder. If you like speaking out loud to someone and feeling like you want to share not just your ideas or your thoughts potentially, but to share the decision making and then the consequences of those decisions with someone. If you are not having fun, as John would say, if you are not having fun doing it alone, then definitely get a co-founder. Either way, this is not easy. It's not easy being a co-founder. It's not easy being a solo founder. You are going to have hard times. You're going to have great times, and you're going to either take the brunt of it with yourself and just, your team, who you can definitely, and they can definitely act as a great co-founder, or you're going to go the co-founder route. And again, that's also going to be difficult. You're going to be making decisions. They might take longer than usual, but you're going to have someone who's going to go through that process with you. So I would say for myself, I'm very comfortable being a solo founder. I think we've built a great company, an awesome team, and I don't feel alone in that seat because of my team members. It doesn't feel like I need a co-founder because they act as an awesome and amazing founding team. But others might disagree. But again, hopefully whichever one you guys pick, you're having fun doing it.
Awesome. Rishi?
Perfect. Yeah, so I actually did maybe 2-3 years ago, I kind of played this out in my mind of looking for a co-founder. I was a product engineering guy. I was looking for the complement, the sales, go-to-market guy. And my thing was always pretty zen. It was the co-founder will find you. You're not going to go find the co-founder. If maybe you find an advisor or an early employee who's really giving it all, is really bringing a perspective to the company that you are not, and that really works well with you. It's a completely personal thing. It's not a robotic thing where you say, hey, you're going to be my co-founder. You've got to have that fit and you feel it. You don't know it. There's no numbers behind it. You feel it. So I've never found it. But you do, in a sense, just like I think we've touched on today, there's like a hard co-founder, right? Someone with the title, but there's also soft co-founder. It's your initial team. It's your initial advisors. And each individual one of them is going to bring you something that you're not bringing, that you don't know as well to the table. And that's really how you fill out your co-founder field. It's through maybe 10 people who are your soft co-founders, not one person who's your hard co-founder. And yeah, finding them, it's all about networking. I think everything you do as an early stage founder is you network, you talk to people, you're bouncing your idea off of them, but also you're seeing who they know who can help you. And so through that process, you should find people and find your early employees, find your advisors as well.
Yeah, awesome point. So I have, as I noted before, had the sort of concept for Mass Challenge on my own and then found co-founders. And then also for the fund, actually pitched and raised about half the fund as a solo founder and then added my co-founders thereafter. And in both cases, some of those co-founders have left or, at various stages. So in the first one, I would say I kind of just picked up the first people. I pitched to somebody that I worked with and he was like, I love the idea. Let's do this together. And I was like, great, let's do it. And there was no real disciplined process. He's a smart guy. We were friendly. I knew him. It wasn't like a random stranger, but it wasn't a disciplined thought process for how do our skill sets match? Let's work together for 6 months and see if it works, that kind of a thing. Whereas with the fund, I was much more deliberate. And I think that's the model that I would really approach it with, is I always knew that I wanted a co-founder. Even though I do like to be in control, I do have, I do feel like I can do a lot of stuff on my own, and I was able to raise money on my own, et cetera. But I had to really deliberately network and say, I am seeking a co-founder. And then what I would recommend is working with it's this classic adage of hire slowly, fire quickly, right? So, try to work with somebody as long as possible before you commit them into the group as a co-founder. So you can bring them on as employees, or volunteers, as interns, as employees, et cetera, sort of work them up that chain. And then really, once you have the comfort level, then you can sort of flip the switch and say, look, you've been here for more than half the time. You're really a co-founder. So let's turn that on. You can, offer equity that vests over time so that everybody gains comfort, et cetera. It is tricky, but I do think, Rushi, to your point, it's much tougher to do it in a Zen-like manner. And sometimes it will work, but I do think this is best executed as a conscious, deliberate strategy with, effective networking and, frankly, patience. For the fund, it took me, I was pitching for money, and it was at least 6 months until I had like realistically good candidates as a co-founder. I talked to 30 other people as potential co-founders, but none of them were, frankly, even close to being a good fit, even though they're great people. And then I found like the perfect co-founder did kind of fall into my lap, but in a sense of like making your own luck by having lots and lots of at-bats with people, then the Zen effect may actually come into play. So good stuff. I have I think just one more question for the panelists, and then I want to open it up. For the record, I'm going to mark the other poll as answered. We've got some more answers. It looks like more and more solo founders. So I think that is the primary bulk of the audience, which is great. So I'm going to mark that question as answered. I don't know if that does anything on your guys' side, but so I will then open it up for Q&A. So everybody in the audience, start thinking of other questions that maybe we haven't covered. Those of you virtually, I think it's pretty easy to just enter it into the Q&A section. I think there will be people in the room with microphones. So just start thinking of what your question is and get ready to ask it. So just going through the panel one more time, just like biggest advice for people that are looking to launch a company as a solo founder, like the number one takeaway from your perspective. I think it's maybe a little bit of a recap of what we've already covered, but maybe there's one or two insights that we didn't cover that you think are pretty key. And Rushi, why don't we start on your side and we'll work in the opposite direction.
Sure thing. My one piece of advice now. I think starting a company, whether you have a founder, whether you have 3 founders, whether you're a solo founder, it's a hard endeavor. And you have to be pretty bold to go out there. You're saying, I found value where no one else has seen value. I'm going to put all my time in there. And I expect you to put time or capital in it with me. It's pretty bold, and it's definitely tough. But I think as a solo founder, you just have to be, let's say, 5 to 10%, a little tougher, a little more clever, just a little more of everything. It's not a huge difference, but just a little more. And I think if you're willing to do that for the control, the speed of decision making, all the benefits, then it can be tremendously rewarding.
Awesome. Melissa?
I think I'm going to go back to fun. I mean, I hope that you guys are having fun, and I'm not saying you won't have bad days. We have many of them. I think that having fun throughout the entire thing and making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who can support you, whether they're teammates, advisors, and making sure that and I think that, I talked a little bit about this in a previous conversation, you need to wake up and feel like you cannot live without solving this problem, and then decide to go down this route, because it's not easy and you'll have some tough days. And every single time you feel like, you know what, I can't do it anymore, you have to go back to that nope, because if tomorrow comes and I say, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm not going to be able to live without feeling like I'm not going and solving this problem. So making that decision and then trying to have fun throughout the entire time and building a really good network around you, I think is extremely important.
Awesome. And Mo?
I think one thing that happens when you decide to start a business is you get humbled really quickly. I think some days you're like, wow, I'm amazing, I can do everything. The next day you're like, who raised me? Like, how? This is not okay. So I think my biggest piece of advice would be, don't try to do it all. Like, be honest with yourself about what you're good at, where your strengths are, and then surround yourself with the people that can continue building and growing with you, whether that's a community, if you're not hiring yet, or you do have a team. I think it's really important to surround yourself with the right type of people that share the same passion and vision. And then just, be honest with yourself, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'll throw in on top of that, kind of reiterating some of it, but it's important to have a big vision, right? And have these huge goals, and but it's also important that you take baby steps. Like, you can't jump from 0 to 10,000 in a day. And a lot of the founders want to, but you have to recognize that you've got to just line up all of the dominoes. You got to get everything in place, and that sometimes feels very mundane and boring when you have this big vision. But it's pretty critical and important. So even within this context of finding a co-founder, you might have that goal to find a co-founder. A bunch of people noted that in their comments, that they are a solo founder hoping to find a co-founder. So that's a big and difficult goal. It's harder than it sounds to go do. So if you are in that camp, set that as a goal, and then just create little steps to get there, and recognize it's not going to happen in a week. It's probably not going to happen in a week, right? It might, but it's likely to take 3, 6, 9, 12 months. It might take a while. So you're going to have to kind of build up to it and brace yourself in the meantime to get through stuff on the way there. So I'm ready to open up to Q&A. I don't immediately see any questions.
So John, there's a few questions if you scroll all the way to the top of the Q&A feed. And then
I was scrolling to the bottom, so I was looking at the wrong end. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll walk around the room here, see if anyone has a question. They can just raise your hand. Maybe we can alternate back and forth.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, let me, why don't you grab somebody from the room there, and then I can read through the questions and pick one.
Yep. Give me 1 second. The people at home to hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about all this. I am a solo founder myself, and I'm wondering your perspective on going out and raising VC funds by yourself. And there's often a lot of pushback, especially when you're either like super technical and don't have, the business acumen or the lived experience to do it.
Great question.
I'll go for it. Yeah, I think raising money is hard no matter what. And there's probably a million reasons that make it a lot harder. I would say I've been out and raised money successfully being a solo founder. My one thing is, especially in the old days, or not the old days, but a few years ago before COVID, when everything wasn't on Zoom, and you'd go into a VC's office and there'd be 2 or 3 of them, or 2 or 3 angel investors, and it would just be you, right? Anytime you do that, that's just a hard situation. Trying to convince 3 people when there's 1 of you. I would say always try to bring an advisor who balances you out, maybe a previous investor who balances you out, or another employee who also balances you out, who can point to, hey man, you forgot to tell them about our awesome revenue numbers. And so just someone in your corner, and it will give you a big oomph. They may not be, a founder with you, but it's still another person on your side in the room, which is tremendously helpful.
I heard you say if you're technical and you've not had the business acumen, is that correct? Okay. So I am the opposite of you. And I can say I completely understand where you're coming from. It's difficult because they ask you, okay, well, who completes this, or what completes this side of the business? And I think the best way to be able to address those questions is, firstly, I write all of them down and make sure that in my next meeting, I address them before they can even ask them. So that question mark in their head kind of goes away immediately. But I would agree, if you're super early on, having an advisor or an investor with you in the pitch, or even potentially a contractor that you feel very comfortable with, who might be able to fill those shoes, is a great way to equalize the play field when you're pitching.
I don't have too much to contribute here. I haven't been in the position to raise money yet, but I do know what some of our growth and expansion plans we will be. So this is also helpful for me. So thanks for asking.
Well, I can chime in as an investor too, because I think it is something that we discuss every time we look at a solo founder, and it is a concern because it introduces this team risk, as I mentioned before. But it isn't always a problem, and we've made multiple investments in solo founders, so it's not something that is a deal breaker. It's just something that requires additional investigation. And I think mostly a lot of what we're looking for is, are there other team members who are capable enough to offset the weaknesses of the solo founder themselves? And are they adequately incentivized to stick with the company? So a lot of it is we'll look at the cap table. And if the solo founder has 90% equity and there's 10% distributed across 20 other team members, then they're not really properly incentivized. Like, they don't have the same level of ownership. They could leave at any time to go get another job, to go get something else. And that introduces this risk that, hey, especially if they're a business founder and they're not the technical founder, what if you lose your CTO? What if they take the development team with them? That introduces a lot of risks into the business. So I think to the point of the founders on the panel, try to address that stuff up front. Try to solve those problems for yourself and your own business by allocating equity that vests over time for your employees so that they are vested in the company and they have an interest in it. And then make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that compensate for your weaknesses. I had, as a challenge at Mass Challenge and elsewhere, especially at Mass Challenge though, the first probably 5 or 7 people I hired were my exact personality type, right? So they were not compensating for my weaknesses. I hired a lot of people that looked and sounded like me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a smart person. I like them. You get along great. You'll fit in perfectly. And then after 8 months into it, I was like, why are we so disorganized? Why is nothing structured and organized? And it's because we don't have any of that personality type. Like, we're all the same person making all the same mistakes and nobody's catching them. So it's important to have that balance. That took me a while to figure out, but just basically address all these team issues on your own. It's critical for your own survival. And then it will be much easier to present them to an investor when you go to them, because they will already have been addressed. It's still harder in practice than it sounds, but pretty key. There's 2 questions in the chat that I think are both great, and they're related. So I'm going to ask them together, which is basically like, at what point in the founding of your company do you either think that you should start to look for a co-founder, or the other one is to fill out this board of trustees or board of advisors, sort of, kind of, because I think which makes a lot of sense at the early stage when you're kind of brainstorming the strategy and the structure and the design. It may be your idea, and it may be originating fully from your soul and your passion set, et cetera. And you may not be as necessary to be surrounded with 5 or 10 other people. But at some point, I think Melissa, or maybe it was Mo actually, it noted that, as you think of franchising and growing, then you think like maybe you'll need a co-founder then. Did you guys add advisors from the very, very beginning, a couple months in, 6 months in, at a certain revenue threshold? Similarly with co-founders, how do you think that through in terms of a threshold? Is there a threshold that you feel like, yeah, that's the point when I definitely need a co-founder, or is it unknown and you're just going to play it out until you feel the need? And maybe Rushi, you had mentioned that you had looked for a co-founder. So let's start with you on this one, and then others can kind of jump in.
Sure thing. So more on my Zen thing is it's continuous. It's not a discrete time. And really, day one, you should be out there networking. And it can be for many reasons, right? Sorry. You're trying to find other people. You're trying to validate your idea. You're trying to validate your business. You're trying to get insights on how to raise funds. You're trying to get insights on how to grow a sales team. You are out there asking all the questions. And that part of that too should be finding your co-founder or searching for your co-founder. So you should get started right away. That's my advice there.
I'll address it in a few different ways. So for me, the first thing I did was figure out what the business needed. What were the shoes that we needed to fill and that I couldn't fill by, working, as John would say, 80-hour weeks. And then I started searching for advisors who would be a fit first at a more conversational level. So instead of just saying, great, you look awesome, you look great on paper, please sign this and now you're an advisor. I think that, and please be ready to make some mistakes. Not all advisors are the right advisors, and some advisors are not, they might be right for the first 6 months, but they might not be for the growth stage or other stages. And then figuring out when you can start maybe moving away from the advisor side and going towards either a consultant or more so of a contractor or a full-time employee. And like John had mentioned, going after them with, equity and exciting them about the company.
I think for me so far, this has been my idea, my path, kind of my everything. So being a solo founder in this space has been great. But to John's point, like as I plan to expand, there's going to be brick and mortars involved, franchises, there's going to be fundraising. I don't know anything about those things. I just know that that is where the company is headed naturally. So I would need to, have those advisors, have those co-founders, whatever it might be to help kind of grow the business in that direction. So far it hasn't come up because it's just naturally kind of getting to where it's going. And then now as I'm building out a plan for expansion, kind of where I'm like, okay, now I need to start kind of thinking about adding advisors, thinking about maybe adding a co-founder and going from there.
Awesome. So there's a great question in the chat here, but I want to make sure we hear people in the room as well. So maybe we can turn to a in-person.
Yeah, does anyone have yep, well, give me 1 second.
Yeah, my name is Greg, and I work for a company called vChief. We provide fractional chief of staff support for startups and in small organizations. And I'm always curious about how you've started to, build out your employee base, whether that was through contract work, or we work with a lot of startups that initially work with a fractional CFO and then start to develop the organization and operations and things like that. So any information on that front's always helpful.
A great question. How do you guys leverage sort of outside vendors to augment?
So not from a fractional, well, we've basically used a dev shop when we first started. And I think that whether you're a co-founder or founder, you might go through this, and some people have some horror stories around it. But there are positions that we have consulted for, like anything that was finance related in the beginning. And I think that the way that we do that, or the way that we did it, was to figure out what those positions were, and then would it take an army to fill those roles. And obviously then you look at your budget and say, okay, great, I'm just going to go to a potential an agency that would be able to fill this seat until I can afford someone full time. And we've done that several times. I think one of the things that's important when you're looking for the right partner in that sense would be understanding that they have served or serviced similar startups. They have worked with people such as yourself and your team, having at least a little bit of a moonlighting period for like a week or two to understand that they are the right fit, because not every agency or consulting firm is the right fit just because they're able, they say, okay, we can support, we can be an acting CTO, we can be an acting CFO. They have to understand the problem, they have to understand your business, and they should be able to show that they have succeeded in previous businesses or a growth of a similar startup.
That's exactly how we've operated as well. If there's a role that we need to fulfill from an operations standpoint, it's just sitting down and thinking, all right, how much is this going to cost? How much time and training is it going to take for me to do this myself? And is there another solution that already exists that I can outsource this to? And does that make the process easier for me? And that's usually been the latter, being, where we are as a company in terms of growth. It's like, hey, someone's already created this. Let's go ahead and utilize those resources for now while we figure out how to grow and scale in the future.
Yeah, that's the exact same for us, basically, how we're getting started and how we're growing. So.
Yeah, good stuff. I think similarly from my perspective, we it's okay to be scrappy about certain elements of the business at the beginning, and you may not have the budget to be able to either hire somebody or even a vendor. And then as you advance, you may need to just professionalize that role. And sometimes outside vendor is the easiest and cheapest way to do that. I would note that it still requires management. Right. So it's not as if you could say, oh, I've got this outside vendor, they're going to take care of everything, and I'll just turn away and focus on the rest. You still are going to have to manage that entity. So it's not free in terms of your time, and obviously will cost some money, but it can be a very, very good step early on. So I'm going to add one question from the chat or from the Q&A, and then we may have to sort of wrap up. So we'll try to do this one pretty quickly. I'm going to share it on screen. So I think the idea here is on complementary personalities. How do you actively seek out people with complementary skill sets? Any kind of tactical advice for how to find people that complement your own abilities, rather than sort of, I think, discovering that in real time? And this is from Inder. Any thoughts from the panel?
I can get started on this one. So I'd say to begin, you have to be pretty honest with yourself. You have to know what kind of personality you are, what you're good at, what you're bad at. So in order to find that complementary person, you have to find that. And then my suggestion would be just find a piece of work you can do with them. Find a piece of work, whether it's an advisor who wants to help you on a fundraising deck, whether it's one of your first engineering hires and you're working on a small piece of code. Just do a little mini project with them and see how you work with them. There's no trial by fire is the best way to do things. So
I'm going to have to agree. I'm a strong believer in moonlighting because it also shows that they are committed and they want to work with you. And if they're not putting in the time, and it could, by the way, it could be as simple as a coding challenge. If they're not doing it, say no. It doesn't matter what their background is, what company names they have on their profile or their resume. Don't do it because I've been through this before. If they're not going the extra mile with whether it's moonlighting or doing a code challenge, then they're just not the right fit for your company.
Yeah, I think this is just really difficult to do in general. It's hard because, as John mentioned earlier, sometimes you're just gravitating towards those people that have the same personality as you, and they act like you, they talk like you, and it's just easy to be like, oh my gosh, that person's just like me. They're going to care about this business just like I do. Like, perfect, we're bringing them on. And then you're a few months in and you're like, we're not really improving. We're just here still doing what we're doing because there's no there's no new perspective. So it is difficult. I've been trying, I just hired 2 people recently, and I've been trying to find people that don't have the same type of background as me. I'm always drawn to people in sales. I'm like, we're so crazy and fun. And then I'm like, all right, let me find somebody like a little bit different who has a little bit of a different background. So one of my new hires is a teacher. And let me tell you, like, these conversations in the kitchen, I'm like, how did you think that? Like, my mind doesn't work that way. And it's so powerful. My mind shouldn't work that way. Like, it's nice to have that person with me to help me see things differently. But I think at the end of the day, it's just very difficult to be honest with yourself and say, all right, I'm going to venture out a little bit and do something that doesn't quite maybe feel right at the beginning, but hopefully pays off in the long run.
Yeah, I would second all this. I think one of the things that I found very helpful was using personality tests. And I think it's a little bit easier to identify skill sets. Obviously, if somebody's a computer programmer and you are not, that's a skill that they have that you don't. But I think it's equally important, maybe even more important, to get different personality types. So we've used Myers-Briggs. I've used the personality indicator test. They're all good in different ways. I prefer the personality indicator test, but it's not free as easy as Myers-Briggs, which is great as well. So that's another way to do it, is just make people take tests, and those sites will tell you how well you'll work together and what kind of strategies you need to use. I'm going to
Actually, John, I do have one thing to add there because I think it's important. If you're interviewing, don't do it by yourself. If you're a solo founder and you're interviewing, do not do it by yourself. Or if you're going to do it by yourself, make sure they have 2 or 3 interviews after you where they're meeting other teammates of yours. Yes. Because your perspective in the decision-making process, being a solo founder, yes, it's easier, it's faster. When you are bringing people on to your team, when you're onboarding people, it's very important that you get the ideas of the rest of the team and make sure that you are making a group decision, because all it does is create bottlenecks for you in the future.
Awesome. I'm going to very quickly summarize. We've got 30 seconds left. So there are advantages to being a solo founder: speed, control. Some of the challenges: getting other perspectives, collaboration, lack of collaboration, maybe loneliness. Fundraising could be more difficult, but you can strategies to address this: getting good advisors, strong employees, complementary skill sets, being disciplined and prioritizing your activities, taking breaks, learning to say no, making sure you're having fun, and then being really mission driven and hiring awesome people. I think no matter what, being a founder is difficult. So this is just one more challenge along the road, and it's definitely solvable. Thank you guys all.